So, the million-dollar question, what is 5G? So, the way we've looked at defining 5G through the project is, firstly, to look at the uses of 5G. So, if you go back to the start when people first started to get 1G mobile phones that could just be used for phone calls and things like that, and then it moved to 2G, which 2.5G, where you could do a bit of web browsing. I used to have one of these flip-top phones, and it had a WAP browser on it, and you could get basic stuff like BBC website and check football scores and stuff, but it was pretty flaky. It didn't work particularly well. And then we got 3G, which enabled all that stuff to start working better. You could start to actually look at proper websites, even though it did take longer. And then we got into 4G, where things like video streaming all on the bus all of a sudden started to become a real possibility. You know, you could actually see a signal working, and you could get quite a good experience web browsing as well. 5G, I think, will usher in another range of applications that we can use, which we'll start to treat sort of everyday things. So it could be virtual reality, it could be augmented reality, and then going into industrial applications, things like where 5G can be used to manage factories, things like that. So that's one way of defining it. It's about the sorts of uses that this generation will usher in. Also, people like to use technology to define it as well. So one key thing with 5G is they say it's open source, which means that you can use widely available source to actually build your networks, to manage your networks. King's College London, who are one of the early partners on the project, showed us a server that they developed, which basically does everything that a mobile network operator does on a cheap Dell server. So it's about how you actually take the cost out of building these networks by using just sort of standard bits of equipment that you can buy on the internet. But it's open source, so it's open for lots of people to be able to work on it. And then there's other sorts of radio technology as well, like millimeter wave, which is new stuff that's coming through, offers massive capacity, and we'll hear more about that later. There's beamforming, which can use intelligent radios to sort of track your mobile and send quite a narrow beam of data towards your device as you're walking around and moving. So then that enables you to use the spectrum more effectively. And then there's also new radio. So how can we actually share spectrum more effectively? So, you know, we've all been in a situation where we see that we can maybe get a 4G signal in urban areas like here in Lancaster, but then when you move out into the rural areas not very far away, that signal disappears and you go down to sort of 3G or 2G. What if we could actually get that spectrum from the mobile operators like Vodafone that aren't interested in doing the rural bits and then use that more effectively? That's quite challenging for them because they don't want you to interfere with their existing services. But it's already happening with the old TV signals. When we switched from analog to digital TV, large bits of that spectrum were given up, and now that's managed by Ofcom and Nominet. So a range of different people can use that TV white space, as it's called. So our project was taken, you know, saying, how can we actually use that? What can we learn from sharing lots of that TV white space in practical terms? And then I think the gentleman over there mentioned standards. I get really confused with all the standards. I know there's people who go to standards meetings all the time, but essentially you've got different standards bodies that work on technical standards. There's the ITU. They have a standard for 5G. Then there's 3GPP, which is the sort of standard that most mobile phone operators work to. And then there's the IEEE, and they have standards which are applicable to 5G as well. I suppose what's interesting is that all these standards are coming on stream at different times of the year, and different manufacturers back different standards depending on what they want. So we've tended not to focus too much on the standards, although it does vex a lot of technology people, of which I'm not one. So 5GRIT and 5G, how did we sort of get all that information and sort of put it together into a project? So back in 2017, when the government did their first briefing event for the 5G the 5G trials and test beds program. There wasn't any 5G handsets available. You could see them if you went to like Mobile World Congress or the CES show in America. But certainly you couldn't buy them on the British High Street or on Amazon. So there wasn't much equipment. The standards were still being ratified by those different bodies, so that meant that it was hard for the equipment manufacturers to do stuff with 5G. And also the spectrum was just in the process of being auctioned, so we couldn't actually say, okay, there's a bit of 5G spectrum that we could use. But we looked at it and thought laterally and said, well, what we can provide is a sort of 5G experience using existing bits of technology. So using things like Wi-Fi and blending different bits of wireless equipment. And also we could see things like millimeter wave radios coming onto the market. And I mentioned the TV white space. We saw that there was a really compelling use case there that we could learn from how you could actually share that spectrum more effectively. But as well as that, there was a sense, it's like, here we go again, it's going to be like London will get 5G, and then a few of the big cities, and the rural areas are going to get left behind, because that's what always tends to happen with these things. So we said, well, we think this can play a really important part and be really valuable for rural areas. So we're going to bring together a consortium of organisations and businesses that can understand how rural communities work and think, and start this very much from an end user perspective. So these are all the potential opportunities that 5G can deliver. But what does that mean for you at your tourist destination, on your farm, in your house, which is on the side of a hill that doesn't get particularly good broadband at the moment? And so we said, right, we're going to take those perspectives, and then we'll work back with the great consortium of partners that we have. And really pleased that all the consortium partners are here today. You're going to hear from them all in turn as we go through the project. The way we delivered the project, we had a phase one, which included all the partners. At the end of that phase one, King's College London stepped down because they'd been doing a lot of the theoretical work on the wireless at the start, and so did Broadway, but we're delighted that Michael from Broadway is here today to explain their perspectives on it. But all the other partners have been involved all the way through. I think the great thing about this consortium is I've worked with all of them over the last few years. We've been running Cybermoor for about 20 years now, and we've engaged with them all at different times on different use cases. But they're all real world leaders in their own particular fields, and they really get rural communities in terms of how things work, what needs to be done, how you actually communicate with people. And as we'll hear later, when you drop in new technology like 5G into places and expecting it to work in a relatively short space of time, which 1 year is, it may sound like a lot in technology terms, but in farming terms, in tourism terms, it's a long time in a rural community. Sorry, it's a relatively short time. So we have to try and make all that work. When we looked at the different elements that we could do with the project, there was a few that really jumped out at us. So rural broadband is a constant headache for both the people who live in rural areas, but also for our colleagues from DCMS, Department for Culture, Media and Sport, who are tasked by wider government of actually getting broadband out to some of the hardest and most remote places. So we wanted to see how we could actually deliver that connectivity to homes. They also have a brief around rural tourism, or tourism in general, and giving people who visit the UK the best experience. So we wanted to try and improve that visitor experience. But we also knew that farmers, be they hill sheep farmers in Cumbria or arable farmers in North Yorkshire, could probably make more of this technology if it was put into their hands and they could understand the potential of it. And particularly the final one there, we knew from working with Blue Bear systems in the past that there was a real restriction on the use of drones in rural areas because of the communications links into them, and we wanted to see, could 5G actually deliver those better links to those drones, and if so, could that actually improve their use and open up new use cases for them? Because as we see more and more services being withdrawn from rural areas, the scope to use lots of different technologies to try and fill some of those gaps.